there we go.
All right. We are getting there this morning. You'd think we'd have this whole technology thing down by now, but some days things go better than others. And I think we're just waiting for Dan. He did say he was going to be here, so we should give it a few more minutes.
So Liza Jane, that really is a beautiful black horse.
Ah.
I didn't want it to pile on with everybody else, but although have to make sure that no foot rot this spring.
Isn't that something? Yeah, I wasn't really even taking a picture of the horse. I just wanted to go see how bad the river was and got out in the middle of that, and I had water up over my boots, and it's and then I posted it trying to show the river, and everybody's nice horse. I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, he's pretty, isn't he? Yeah, bronky little bugger though, boy. Whew. I just got a lecture from my daughter this morning. So why don't you have a really broke horse to ride? Do you have to do this? Yes, I do.
I just got grounded on a being able to go on a raft trip on the North Fork of the John Day.
Yes.
Alone. I was told that was totally unacceptable and that I wasn't going to do that. So I had to convince my son to take a few days off work to go with me on that trip here in a couple of weeks. So.
Oh, that'll be nice. Yeah.
So anybody wants to take a raft trip, just call. I evidently need adult supervision or less than adult supervision. I don't know.
Bruce, do you not have a dog? That's what I use for my partner when I want to go somewhere by myself all the time.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Liza Jane.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a heartbreak right now. So
I'm
getting better about it, but I lost my buddy here not too long ago, and so yeah, I don't have him anymore either.
Well,
for companionship or somebody to blame.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that Marley did it. I'm almost positive that he.
I'm sorry, Bruce.
Oh, that's okay. That's
difficult to survive that.
You know, that's the price you pay for unconditional love. Yeah.
That is true. Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry I was a little late.
Good morning.
We are all here now. And just to let Kelly and Dan know, no one signed up for public comment today. And so we are on YouTube, and we will get this thing recording here in a minute, and turn it over to Kelly and Dan to get started this morning.
Sounds good.
Kelly, go ahead.
Okay, we are being recorded officially. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today for our DEI and Environmental Justice Committee meeting. I have to admit, this is the first meeting that Dan and I are co-chairing. And so I'm relying heavily on staff today and appreciate everything you guys do. But we all got an agenda from Courtney. Are there any updates to the agenda? Anything added? No.
Nope. And I just included it in the chat just so you guys would all have it if you didn't have the email in front of you.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. So we'll get started with updates from Oweb staff on engagement with non-traditional partners.
And I think I see Stephanie's on her phone, so I'm not sure if you're having technical difficulties. I think Lisa and Stephanie have been doing some amazing outreach work, and we're going to share what they've been doing.
Steph, do you want to lead off or do you want me to?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I can lead off. So we have continued following the pick 3 recommendation that was brought up a few committee meetings ago, and reaching out to 3 either individual non-traditional partners or groups of non-traditional partners per quarter. So yeah, we've got 3, and I'll go through them. So first one is that Lisa and I met with a group of organic stakeholders a few weeks ago. So that was one for this quarter. Second, when we had met with the governor's office a few months ago to get recommendations for non-traditional partner outreach, one of the standing groups that we were recommended to start participating in was Capital Connections. That's a group that meets once a month, and it's a great place to meet people where they're already at and where they're coming to. So I participated in that this month, and I'm planning to go in person in the future. I also tried to participate in a Partners in Diversity event called Say Hey that will be occurring again in August and occurs every 4 months. I was unfortunately stymied by a serious accident on the interstate bridge, and I wasn't able to get to Vancouver to the event. But that was another one that we had hoped to have and engage in this quarter.
And then do you want to talk a little bit about the meeting we had with Len Bergstein, but we haven't been able to circle back with the executive director yet?
Yep. We were also recommended to reach out to the Albina Vision Trust, which is re-envisioning the Albina neighborhood. And one of the priorities is reconnecting the neighborhood with the river. And so we thought that was a great possible point of connection between Oweb and the trust. Len Bergstein, who Lisa and I both know well and have worked with for many years, is an advisor to the board. And so just following the recommendations that we've gotten to start out by reaching out to folks within organizations who we already know and have a relationship with, we were able to reach out to Len to learn a little bit more about the trust and some of the things that they're thinking about in the next few years. And then, so we provided Len some follow-up information about Oweb to share with the trust, and just, so we'll be following up with their executive director. And then Lisa and I also have a meeting scheduled with Shantae Johnson, who's on the Board of Agriculture and is involved with the Black Oregon Land Trust. So that is coming up in a couple of weeks.
And I would just add that we have a second meeting scheduled Friday with Carlos Garcia with the Oregon Community Foundation. So just continuing to build on the connections we've been making and trying to find, new people that we haven't traditionally worked with at Oweb.
I have,
Liaison.
Steph-
I have a question. I can't find my little hand thing to raise. Easy one, Stephanie. What's an organic person?
Oh, sure. So there are some organizations, and we've I think started referring to them when we were still at ODA as organic stakeholders, but there is an Oregon Organic Coalition. Amy Wong is the executive director of that coalition. And then other stakeholders have included either growers who are organic certified or representatives from organizations like Oregon Tilt.
Bruce, did you have a question? No. Okay. I have a question. So it's the Albina Vision Trust. Did I get that right? Okay. What river are you reconnecting the neighborhood with?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Great question. So it's the Albina neighborhood in North Portland, and it's the Willamette River that the group is interested in reestablishing a connection with.
Thank you. Okay, great.
I would just add, when we met with the organic stakeholders group, we were able to make a connection for them with Jan Lee and into the OECD conference, and thinking about some of the organic practices that may have climate benefits, and linking that up as a conversation, because they didn't necessarily have the right connections there. So we just have been trying to link people together and look for additional opportunities, and even across agencies now too, other grant opportunities coming in where things may not fit Oweb, but they may have another connection in another agency's program.
And I would just add 2 additional things. Oweb in the past, many years ago, used to did have some grants with Verde, which is located out of Portland. They had a lot of staff transitions, and I have finally been able to connect with them, and we'll be meeting with them later this month. They have a lot of workforce development and other programs that we might be able to connect with.
Yeah.
And then in addition, I have a relationship over the last couple of years with the Roundhouse Foundation, located out of Sisters, and also has a lot of workforce development programs that they fund. And a lot of our grantees have started to connect with Roundhouse Foundation for types of projects that are not a good fit for Oweb. And Lisa will be meeting with the executive director, I think, towards the end of August to make that connection. And Lisa, were you going to update the committee on your tribal meetings?
Actually, I was just thinking about that, and then we should probably go to Dan. So Stephanie and Ken Fetcho and I have been doing meet and greets with the new leadership at Oweb with the federally recognized tribes in Oregon. We're about halfway through. And our goal is, we'll probably have a little break this summer, but before my first year is over, we will have met with all of them and had an opportunity to look for additional opportunities. And we've learned a lot, I think, in some of these meetings in terms of how they're organized with natural resources versus the water connections, and trying again to find more opportunities for us to interact and connect for natural resource issues.
And just one note, in addition to the 9 federally recognized tribes that are located in Oregon, we also met with the Nez Perce tribe, which is, I think, headquartered in Idaho. So, but yeah, I had a great meeting with them last week.
And that was a really fun meeting because they didn't know much about Oweb at all. And so it opened the door to some really great conversation in terms of opportunities and follow-up.
Thanks, Lisa and Stephanie. That's great. Dan, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Can you hear me? Great. Terrible difficulties getting logged in this morning. Kelly, thanks for kicking things off. Let me get my hand lowered. Several questions of Oweb staff, but before going there, in the spirit of our meeting today, just wanted to call out and recognize June Pride Month. A lot of events going on this month in recognition of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our communities. So always inspired by these conversations and this topic. I'm curious, Lisa and Stephanie and others, are the meetings that are taking place, are they more just sort of meet and greet, awareness building, or are you, framing some intentional questions for engaged conversation? It's great to make the connections. I'm wondering a little bit more about kind of the substance of the meetings themselves. And then the other question is, Lisa, you just mentioned meeting with the tribal governments. Is that primarily with tribal government staff, or have you been fortunate to get an audience and participation with elected tribal council leaders? Thanks.
So why don't I'll hit the tribal government meetings first. It's been tribal government staff so far. And we've had, the initial part is meet and greet, but then we've really had some questions about help us understand where your interests are, help us understand where your interests are across Oregon. And so that we have a better idea and are making the right connections when issues come up. And I think one of the things that Stephanie and I both learned and were surprised by with a couple of the tribes was how diverse geographically the interests were in terms of issues and actions happening on the ground related to natural resources. I think the other thing that we learned just in terms of better navigating some of the tribal government structures was this separation in several of the organizations in terms of natural resources being kind of uplands and having more of a forest connection, and then water being separate. And so, recognizing we have more than one place when we're talking about Oweb programs that we probably need to connect with and not assume that the connections are being made internally.
And just a couple of things to add. I think with some of the organic coalition, for example, and ag partners that we've met with recently, I mean, we knew them prior to moving into these roles, but it has been reintroducing Oweb to folks, because I think a lot of folks know of Oweb, but are not familiar with what our primary mission is, what our focus is, and then how we accomplish our work in terms of issuing grants to partner organizations and accomplishing work on the ground that way through those partners and grantees. So I think that's been really valuable, just to understand what other folks don't know about Oweb. And I think it's just going to help them communicate with their members. I think it'll help us revise things like our website to be more accessible to folks who might be looking for a grant for a project. So yeah, I think they have been meet and greet in terms of introducing the agency.
I think the other thing that we've been really intentional about has been talking about board priorities and climate with all of the organizations and the climate resolution and the work that we've been doing agency and board around DEI, and talking to people about especially engaging as we move towards rulemaking with the climate resolution and talking about the opportunities that we see.
Hey, thanks for that follow-up. I'm curious, and maybe a question to committee members here, that is, it sounds like a number of great engagements, right? And a plethora of diverse partners. If it's at all conceivable or possible, as these meetings are lined up into the future on the calendar, to invite and or engage any willing and able and interested committee members to join along in these meetings. Have they been in person? Are they virtual? Is it a mix?
So far, the meetings really have been virtual for the most part.
Okay.
And we surely could include committee members if that is of interest. We have agreed to do quarterly meetings with the ag stakeholders, quarterly meetings with the organic stakeholders. Quarterly meetings are being scheduled now with a group of conservation groups that have specific interest in Oweb. And a lot of it is just to keep people abreast of what the board is doing, where the interests are, and the opportunities that are coming, so that we have ongoing communication and can really think more broadly about some of the additional interests across Oregon.
Awesome. Thank you. Question then to committee members, would there be interest if you knew of upcoming meetings in your particular area, or perhaps groups that you have networks or connections with already? Little lukewarm today.
So Dan, I'll speak up. Oftentimes I find I wear multiple hats in meetings. And so when Stephanie and Lisa meet with our lands and operations officer, Jason Robison, I'll be sitting in on that meeting as well. So as a committee member, I will be attending that meeting. So I'll have that. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Thanks, Kelly. We'll let that ruminate for folks. Even just having kind of a map or a schedule of the dates, a calendar, something that, updates the committee could be aware of future meetings would be fantastic.
I think Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah, Bruce.
Hey, Stan. Lisa, I'm curious, when I hear it's talking about these groups that you're meeting with, I've often wondered what are past practices, what our grants have looked like over the last 10, 15, 20 years. If there's any way, there's either, if you have a summary of the numbers of grantees, how we classify those grantees, has there been repeat grantees on a regular basis? When do new ones come in, and what categories do they fall in? I've got an idea where we think we're going, but I really don't know where we've been.
Okay. I think so. We can get to some of that data through the database. We call it OGMIS. It's the master brain of Oweb granting and the keeper of all. We can go back and have Cyrus do some querying and get some data out for you. I've asked some of those questions, but it was more related to budget. And it takes a little bit of work to pull it, but give us a chance to work with Cyrus, Bruce, and we'll get some of that together. I was mostly interested kind of in numbers when I did it because of workload management. And maybe not quite as much around grantees or grantee types, but we'll try and pull it thinking with kind of the diversity lens on, or if there's something specific you want to know, let me know and we'll try and see what we can get out of it.
Yeah, thanks. And please don't do it just because I asked. If other members of the committee don't think that would be helpful, then I just don't want to burden you with my ignorance. So.
Well, and I was going to ask Shivangi to jump in to see if some of the work that they've been doing, and she raised her hand. So.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that as part of the report that we will be circulating to you guys in August, which will really focus on our conversations with staff about the granting process and the barriers that we've seen and like recommendations around those. As a part of that process, we did dive into the database that Lisa was just talking about and tried to understand over between 2011 and 2021, what grantee types were getting which kinds of grants, like what the success rate was, things like that. So hopefully in August, you will get some amount of overview of that, at least for the last 10 years. And then depending on, what you think is more helpful, we can talk about adding more data to that, et cetera.
Liza Jane.
Thank you. Dan, I think to answer your question, I soaked on that briefly. And I think for me, I would trust Lisa and Stephanie to invite me if they felt that I could be of benefit in that setting with that group, that I had something to add or help with that connection, whether that's rural or ag or however you feel like that would be helpful. And then I would be more than happy to join that. Sometimes in a really rural community where I kind of know everybody, I try to keep my hats a little separate from the Oweb because there's a tendency to connect from a level that's access to Oweb when it's not my role there. So there's some challenges there, but I think for me, if you feel like that's a meeting that I could contribute to, then please just ask me to, and of course I would on that.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Liza Jane. And I think that very much is going to differ for various committee members in different geographies in the state, rural versus urban. Yeah, put me down in that category. I'm smack dab in the heart of Portland, right? With a lot of, proximity to perhaps some of the groups that you're meeting with. And if I know them, these meetings well enough in advance, I can plug them into my schedule and kind of do my best to guard availability. I'm curious, Shivangi, are there a set of common kind of, for lack of better words, DEI performance metrics around government agencies and granting, or are we kind of breaking some new ground here?
I don't think, this is a conversation that Jade and I have been having with the Nature Conservancy as they're trying to develop their metrics. There's really no one set of metrics. I know that the state of Oregon, I think Governor Kate Brown, their office released like a DEI action plan that has some guidance on the goals and tasks that state agencies should be focusing on, which I'll talk more about later today. But that's hopefully something that we can work with Oweb on during one of our tasks of developing sort of like an equity framework. What kind of larger outcome metrics Oweb would want to prioritize and how they would measure that. That's definitely something that we're thinking of working on with you guys.
And if the committee would like the report, it's the action plan, we can get that out to you as well, just so you have that information. Good, we'll do that.
Kelly, how are we doing on the agenda?
We're doing good. I was actually going to move us along to our next topic so we stay on time, but don't want to stifle any additional conversation. So I think we're good to move on. The next update is from Jesse and Eric on the climate listening sessions.
Thanks, Kelly. So I will start and then Eric can add in anything that I miss. So what I thought that I would do is just give everybody an overview of what we did and, you know, the participants that we had and how many and where they came from. And then I just wanted to touch on a couple of major themes that I thought might be relevant to this committee. So what I will talk about is by no means comprehensive in terms of what we heard in terms of input. I'm just trying to focus it to DEI and environmental justice. So we held 6 public listening sessions in April and May. We had about 80 what I call like unique participants attend. So some of those meetings we had participants that were repeat, so they attended multiple listening sessions. We had people from all 6 of our Oweb regions, with the most coming from the Willamette Valley Region 3, and the least from Region 6. The Mid-Columbia region was our region that had the fewest attendees. Participants primarily represented watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and nonprofits, but we did have attendees from local government, tribes, federal and state agencies, and private businesses. So we did have some of those contractors and implementers attend as well. The vast majority of folks that attended identified their role as executive director or coordinator, or a project or program manager, but there was a lot of other options they could choose from. Just those are the big ones. We had 1 tribal listening session in May, and we had representatives from 8 of the 10 tribes attend. So I think we had, at least for those tribes in attendance, except for 1 tribe, I think we had multiple representatives from every tribe come to that tribal listening session. And let's see, we also had an online survey which covered the same content as what was in the public listening sessions, but we did have some additional questions that we asked around the 2 DEI bullet points that were in the resolution. So we specifically asked about those in the survey. We had 44 responses. The survey was anonymous and it was open from mid-March until June. And then Eric Hartstein and I also had some one-on-one conversations with different external partners, agency partners, and 1 tribe who also attended the tribal listening session. So I'll just stop there with any sort of, if there's any questions about the process. And that's not including, I didn't mention the interviews that Shivangi and Jade are doing as part of the Echo Northwest effort. So that's also another piece of this. But for staff, that was the process. Okay, so if you think of any questions, let me know. But some of the major themes. So in the listening sessions, there's what we asked about were challenges and opportunities related to integrating emissions reductions, carbon sequestration and storage, and adaptation and resilience into projects. And then we also asked participants, what is it that we can do? What can Oweb do to help applicants in integrating those kinds of climate considerations into their projects? And then lastly, what's one big important thing that we need to be thinking about as we go into rulemaking? So that's generally what the discussion centered around at those listening sessions. And so some of the things that we heard, some of the major themes that I'll just talk through, particularly around capacity and equity issues, messaging and education, and then trying to create more of an adaptive or learning process as we embark on this. And like I said, this is in no way comprehensive. There's a lot more information about quantification and applications and all of that, but just wanted to try and center this. So in terms of capacity and equity, what we heard repeatedly was just recognizing that different entities have different capabilities and capacity. And range in capacity is going to vary organization to organization and by location. So, rural versus urban. Larger organizations with additional capital will be better situated to adapt to Oweb requirements and may have a leg up in funding. And it just means that people are concerned that these larger, more well-established organizations and the potential geographies, the limited geographies that they might serve, could potentially receive a larger piece of the funding if we're not careful in how we think about what we put in place. Basically, one rule may not be the solution for every area, and really thinking about different places, rural, remote rural, and urban places, and then the resources that are available in each of those. And another thing that we heard was just thinking about how we can be flexible in our definitions and requirements. So recognizing that there's no one way to connect with and enjoy the natural world, or that that there's just that people are going to describe this in different ways and how they're meeting some of these things in different ways. And so trying to be more flexible in what we're willing to accept in terms of responses. Another thing that we heard was just the need to balance trade-offs or to be aware of unintended consequences. So, for example, small projects and their benefits to climate could produce smaller metrics and could appear unimportant compared to larger projects, depending on what we do with the criteria. Carbon sequestration is going to vary just naturally by environment, so west side forests versus east side grasslands. And then there were some concerns around treaty rights and access to cultural harvests. So, for example, if we do something with carbon sequestration, if there's culturally significant plants that fall under that umbrella and it restricts tribal access, that could just be an unintended consequence, something to be aware of. In terms of messaging and education, some of the things that we heard was just messaging really matters because ideas and feelings about climate change vary across the state. And it's important to recognize the difference between priorities of the state versus priorities of the community or the partner that you might be working with. And so an example that was given there was just, a farmer is concerned with putting food on the table for his family or for their family. And while there might be climate benefits, it's just the priority is framed differently. And then the need to create a clearinghouse of resources, provide education and training, and really share success stories and lessons learned and failures so that people can learn from each other and see how people have integrated these kinds of climate considerations successfully in their projects, or what they tried and what didn't work. And then just one of the things that we heard again was just this idea of an adaptive or learning process as we think about rulemaking. So what are ways that we can integrate feedback and learning into the application process and evaluation? Lots of recommendations to start with a more qualitative approach where people can provide qualitative answers and we can move into quantitative down the line. Consider creating a pilot program to test some of this, or take the first iteration of the climate questions and evaluation criteria for a test drive before putting it into official rules. So we heard a lot of themes around that, just like how can we make this, how can we learn as we go through this and not just put pretty hard and fast parameters on it right away, but really be more iterative and adaptive as we learn. And I guess I'll stop there and let's see if Eric Hartstein has anything to add and if there's any questions.
You covered it. Thanks, Jesse.
Great report out, Jesse. Any questions? People are soaking it in. It's midweek.
It's a lot.
Kelly.
I'll add that I was on the tribal call that they had, and mostly wearing an Oweb hat, right, and not my tribal hat. But it was a really good conversation. I thought a lot of really good back and forth, a lot of good information, a lot of great points were brought up, especially, Jesse hit all the points, I think, really that the tribes brought up as far as treaty rights, access to traditional harvest, and trade-offs with different practices. We talked a lot about specific practices that tribes may want to implement that maybe in the short term don't have a climate benefit, but in the long term would. For example, cultural burning. So just kind of bringing those things up and thinking about those trade-offs as we move forward with the application process. So I thought it was a really good conversation, and we learned quite a bit just in that one session. So.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I would just echo that in all of the listening sessions was like incredible conversations, and people were really willing to do it. And I thought a really excellent job of balancing any challenges with also providing opportunities, or where they saw those opportunities, and really different sessions had, while there was a lot of overlap, there were some new points that every session brought up, and it was just really good to get just a broad diversity of opinions and input on with different focus.
Bruce, I see it in your face. You're thinking. What's on your mind?
Nothing for the DEI committee.
You're thinking of that rafting trip. Okay. Anyone else?
I would just add, I want to thank the staff. They did an amazing job setting up the meetings, and were really intentional in terms of the process and the questions, and getting the input and providing feedback back out. I think they've just done an amazing job for all of us. So, thank you, Jesse and Eric and Courtney. And I'm trying to remember, I think Eric Williams was a big part of those meetings as well. And if I forgot somebody, I apologize. You guys did amazing work.
And that seems to be true with everything. It's a global statement. You guys are awesome. Hey, Jesse, when you were talking about capacity and equity and large organizations versus small, I really, really get that. I was engaged several years back in Alaska, and that's a big issue, right? Large corporations versus small. And was there any talk about innovative or creative solutions or leveraging?
There was a little bit, and you'll see it. You'll see it in the summary report that we share for the July board meeting. There were some different things where people were trying to think about maybe potential partnership opportunities, or let's see. Yeah, there definitely was. And I think a lot of it was just, how do we structure, a lot of the discussion just sort of centered on, the question around how do we structure this in a way so that if that is going to be an issue, that benefit doesn't get unevenly distributed in that way. So it was just a lot around asking the questions, and there are some potential things that people came up with, but I wouldn't say like there's one silver bullet, for example, that was mentioned. But you'll have to forgive me. I think I have 80 pages of notes from the survey and the listening sessions that I'm currently working through. So look for more detail in July.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe it's a intentional or conscientious choice point around ensuring that there's equity in investment in large and small, right? That it's so easy. I was engaged with another federal agency issuing tribal grants, and it was so easy to see the large organizations able to put the time and the resource and development into very well-written proposals, well, guess what? Those were the ones that rose to the top every time. And
Right.
it became that issue of, well, here we go again. Will we ever be able to support and prop up those that are in need of some of that support and seed funding to just get launched?
Yeah, and I will say one of the things that did come up was just that the smaller groups, thinking about ways to get them even initial funding to support the proposal development piece, or some kind of initial resources or capacity to help support that proposal development did come up as an idea.
I think I would just add that whole capacity right now in terms of organizations is a real challenge. And these are like traditional organizations that we've worked with, not even talking about, trying to reach out to some of the new organizations. They're strapped in terms of staff. There's been a lot of staff turnover over the last 2.5 years with, the pandemic and everything that went along with it. And then I think just by nature of what they are, they rely a lot on soft money. And so that living from grant to grant, it is just a challenge for them to have the capacity, to do the work, one, but also to even obtain that soft money.
Liza Jane, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. This is just a thought that's rattling around, and I don't know if it would actually solidify into anything, but what I'm thinking about inequity of, resources, basically, whether that's corporate or money or staff or people, for a more challenged group, maybe, could they somehow leverage work that's already occurred in their community to say, we're going to build on that because it's happening here, and that would maybe help communities work more broadly together towards conservation and environmental goals and each other, because they could all benefit from the work that each other's doing. If there was a way to kind of like build that impact without having to be a corporation. And I don't know how that could be measured or encouraged, but it might be a way for communities to take on work as where they live. Is that just some thought?
Thanks for that, Liza Jane. That aligns with a conversation that Stephanie and I were in 2 weeks ago. We were on a field trip in Harney County and the High Desert Partnership there. I mean, that really is multiple community-based organizations working together. It aligns with what we're doing with the Focus Investment Partnerships, bringing that together. I think the thing that I'm recognizing, having been here a bit now, is we're still limited on resources. It seems, we have a lot of money to grant, but it's still limited in terms of the need. And so that puts, some challenges around it.
Yeah, Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Lisa's compliments to the staff. I was able to sit in on 2 of the listening sessions. And they did a superb job. I think it's important for me to listen as a member of the climate committee, specifically for what were the questions or concern about climate. And I was surprised how few there were. There seemed to be a significant buy-in by the majority of people on the call that felt that it was important to work on climate issues, that simply wasn't a question. And all these issues of large size, small size are things that are not brought on by the potential for rules on climate, but are brought on by the how we do grants. They existed before we even considered doing climate rules. They will exist after we do climate rules. They are a concern for grantees and potential grantees on fairness and equity of how we look at any set of criteria, climate or not. So it just reinforced to me the pressure on Oweb and staff to do their best to maintain not just a level playing field, but an equitable playing field in all types of grants. So when they said, okay, you're going to be setting new rules here, but let's make sure we don't do this. And we could have put I felt we could have put any new set of rules on the table, and we would have received 80% of the same concerns. You're putting new rules on, let's go ahead and make sure that it all doesn't go to this group, or we don't get squeezed out because of lack of capacity. So I think it's important in the report that we separate operational structural issues that we have to deal with on any type of grant, and those that are specific concerns on how we're looking at climate. And I think there were some in both categories, but the majority went back to this equitable allocation of resources. So that's my only comment.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Switching a little, Eric or Jesse, were there any themes or discussion around disproportionate impacts of climate on underserved communities, socially vulnerable communities? I didn't hear that in the highlights.
There were, and it is in the notes, but I would say there wasn't as much discussion about that as maybe you would think. It did come up, but yeah, just not quite as much discussion.
All right, just doing another time check here for our final agenda item. I want to give Shivangi enough time to give us the update. So let's move on to our discussion with Eco Northwest on the next steps for Oweb's DEI work and how the committee will be engaged.
Great. First of all, thank you all for inviting me to your board committee meeting. I will share my screen because I have some materials to present to you. So Courtney asked me to give the committee a brief overview of the work that we've already done, Jade and I, and along with Linny from Willamette Partnership, and what the next 6 months will look like in terms of the project. And so I just wanted to give you a rundown of everything that has happened since we started working with Oweb in January. We had our kickoff meeting in between November and December, where we finalized the scope of work for this year. And we have been having monthly check-in meetings with Eric and Courtney just to coordinate on both the trainings that we've been doing with staff and board, along with any data requests and input we need on our grant review. So we have 3 main sort of work streams that we are working on currently. We had our DEI trainings that ran from January up until this month of June. And we are happy to say we have completed all our trainings with staff and board. That does not mean that we will disappear. We are very much going to be actively having conversations with staff and board in the next 6 months, but along other sort of topics. While we were doing staff trainings and board trainings, we were also working on a review of the Oweb's granting process. And so that involved reviewing a lot of documentation on the way that Oweb's current grant process is set up, what kind of grants Oweb offers, what the review criteria are, what the review process is like. We are lucky to sit in on the review, I guess it was for fall grant making, the review of 3 main grants and a couple of site visits. And while we were doing that, we were also scheduling conversations, one-on-one conversations with staff members who work along various stages of the grant making process. So we spoke to Tara in accounting, we spoke to Eric Williams, since he's manages the entire grant program process, and a bunch of other folks involved in the process. And that was really useful. I think because everyone works one-on-one with applicants, it gave us a really good understanding of the kinds of issues that applicants often raise with, grant facilitators, et cetera, and what sort of avenues and solutions Oweb might consider. Linny from Alignment Partnership, she has been leading our community outreach effort, and we just completed our last interview, and we will be wrapping up our deliverable to Oweb, which includes the sort of like a brief description of Oweb's current grant making process, the barriers that we have observed and heard from our conversations with staff, community outreach, what we observed from the grant making data, and along with recommendations for Oweb, both short-term, maybe low-hanging fruit, along with larger, maybe structural changes that Oweb might want to consider going forward. And this deliverable will be delivered to Courtney, Eric, and Oweb board and the DEI staff, DEI committee in August. And I think Oweb will have about a month to review it. I know everyone's really busy, so we kept sort of a longer time frame to get back comments and feedback. And we will also be doing follow-up meetings with Eric and Courtney to discuss feedback, see how we can incorporate it and make our report better and more useful for Oweb going forward. And then a final report will be delivered to Oweb in October, along with a presentation to the full Oweb board in the October board meeting. And then while all of that is happening, in July, we're going to start our last 2 work streams, which are helping Oweb come up with an equity statement and develop an equity framework. And like you mentioned, Dan, maybe think of some metrics that Oweb can use to measure its equity outcomes and priorities moving forward. And this will involve a lot of conversations with the board and staff about how they feel equity fits into Oweb's larger goals of doing equitable grant making around restoration and other environmental goals, but also how individual work streams at Oweb, so accounting or outreach to non-traditional partners, how those decisions all the way from deciding, developing a plan for the year to choosing how to engage partners, each step of each work stream, how you can incorporate equity as you go along it. And yeah, so that is scheduled to begin in July, and we will be delivering draft equity statements and equity framework in November. Again, sort of like a 1-month turnaround for Oweb to give us comments, follow up with Courtney and Eric to incorporate that feedback, and then deliver the final equity statement and lens in January and presenting that at the January board meeting. And so I will stop there and let you guys ask questions about that work plan. And then I thought it would be useful, since we have a smaller group from the board here, to kind of give you a preview of what we're planning for our July session when we will be there at Enterprise in person. And just to see, like, if you think that the tasks that we have planned will help get at what we're trying to achieve, which is getting the board to talk more about how it sees equity fit into its work long term. So I will stop there for now. Questions? No, pretty straightforward. Okay, I will keep moving then. So like I mentioned, our July board meeting, it will be like a 2-hour session that Jade will be leading. And this is an exercise we've already done with the staff members, but it's helping the board take the big concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion and whittling them down to what do they really mean for Oweb. And so we have a couple of exercises planned, and this exercise went pretty well with the staff. And so we thought we would do it with the board. We are going to be running through, we've never really done this in person, so we'll have to see how we do it in person with like sticky notes and like working around the room. But basically, we wanted to get all the board members engaged in defining what they think individually diversity should mean for Oweb's work, what inclusion and equity should mean, what equity and equitable outcomes look like for Oweb, and how Oweb can be intersectional in its work. And so the way we are framing this is through Oweb's mission to help protect and restore healthy watersheds and natural habitats that support thriving communities and strong economies. Obviously, I think most organizations are wary of having mission creep, especially when they start incorporating additional, considerations into the work that they're doing. And so we want to tie DEI and equity to Oweb's mission and see how it fits in. And so the exercise that we have planned is getting the board members to really break down what do healthy watersheds look like from Oweb's perspectives, what are natural habitats and how do they contribute to thriving communities and strong economies. And then through that process, how does equity factor into the daily tasks that Oweb does to achieve this mission? And so that is probably going to be like an hour-long exercise. And then the rest of the time, we are going to work with Oweb on looking at both the action plan that I previously mentioned and Lisa mentioned that the governor's office has released, and seeing how that applies to Oweb's work as a state agency. And then we will be walking through some equity statements as a primer. So we will be going over sort of what an effective DEI or equity statement is, and then some examples from state agencies, nonprofits around the US to see what are strengths of some of these equity statements, what are maybe some pitfalls, and what the Oweb board's goals are for its own equity statement within this framework. And yeah, that is what we have planned for July. I would love to get any feedback from you all about concerns about any exercises or suggestions to make it maybe more interactive, especially in an in-person environment. I don't know how these meetings usually go, so any feedback would be very, very welcome. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Shivangi. That was great. Does anyone have any questions or suggestions of how to do this in person? I'm opening it up for other people before I start talking. Okay, I'll start talking then. So I think, first of all, I'm really excited that we actually will get to do this in person. So I think it's great. In the past meetings that I've gone to where you're trying to engage people in conversations and talk through specific, topics and things, I think your sticky note idea is pretty good. We did that for, if we can all think way back to 2019 with the 100-year water vision. We had some meetings around the state for that, and we kind of did the same thing. It was themes. And then we each had some sticky notes and we wrote down, our topic, and then we put it up and then we grouped things as they kind of naturally fell into different categories. So I think that could be a good way to to start or to get some solid feedback there. And then also just you guys do such a great job of sort of introducing things to us at first and having some really good dialogue about that to start with to get everybody kind of going. So that would just be kind of my suggestions.
Eric, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so just one other wrinkle to add to the July board meetings. It will be in person, but we will also have virtual participation. So we're going to have at least a handful of board members that will be there virtually. So all the exercises that are going to be developed need to be able to incorporate both in person and those participating virtually.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know. We will make sure to have virtual tools available as well.
And I would just say, don't be afraid to ask Eric or I to help if you need one of us to do something with the online group, or we'll have staff there to help with that. So we can just tell us what to do. We can follow directions really well.
Okay, that sounds good. And then I also had a question just generally about how does the board DEI committee interact with the staff DEI committee? And then Courtney sent me like a little, not a charter, but like committee priorities for the following year. And I was just wondering if how you think ECHO's work and the equity statement and equity lens fits in with your sort of goals for the next year or two.
So I'll jump in. It's a newly formed committee, right? Versus some of our other committees that may have more years behind them. And so I think that's something we're maturing into. But to answer your question more directly, they should fit, right? The work of ECHO Northwest should clearly fit within the committee's priorities and the overall priorities around DEI with Oweb. So if they're out of sync, or which I don't think they will be. I think that Courtney often reaches out to Kelly and I. Yeah, having you share this update, opening the floor for others to weigh in, voice a thought or concern or suggestion is just what we need to be doing. Any others on that question?
I would just add that, so at this point, the staff DEI committee and the board DEI committee have not engaged. The staff committee's been going on for 4+ years. As Dan said, this is a really new committee of the board. I think as we think about the next 6 months and getting input from both the on the draft products from both the staff committee and the board committee, it might be an opportunity to bring them together at some point, something we can talk about. I think also just thinking about the timeline and board meeting timing for this committee, I think as the staff person, I would be interested if the committee might be willing and interested in maybe meeting a little bit more frequently over the fall and winter to engage in some of the draft products we get from ECHO Northwest to prepare for that January board meeting. I think you will be a great resource for us as we work through drafts and get feedback and prep for the full board meetings. So just would interested if the full if this committee would be potentially interested in meeting a little bit more frequently to help us through those draft products.
So I'll jump in here. I think if we need to meet a little more frequently just to make sure we have a really good product for that January meeting, it makes sense. It's good to do the work in the smaller group in order to prep. So I think that makes sense to me.
I would ask this committee as well, because we have the staff DEI committee, would it be helpful if they sat in on these meetings going forward, just to have the opportunity to interact with all of you, and thinking about that opportunity to share ideas?
Lisa, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I know nobody wants more meetings on their calendar. I totally understand that, but I think it is really important that staff hear what the board members are saying, and then we can engage with staff as well, just so we're all, both are on the same page moving forward. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I like that idea too. So
Yeah.
Good.
Liza Jane.
Thank you, Kelly. Just one thought I have about the meeting, and I don't want to make an assumption, so I'll throw it out there. Trying to get the folks that are more reserved in sharing to speak first would be great, because there's some of us who are more free with sharing our thoughts, and they're not more valuable than those who don't. So in these kind of conversations, especially, I think whatever effort can be made to get folks comfortable in sharing what they're thinking before is really positive. But it looks good. It looks really like I look forward to it. And I hope it's in the morning too. I don't know when we're on the agenda, Eric, but I think we'll do better than we would in the afternoon. So I'll throw that in ahead of time.
We've read your mind, Liza Jane, and scheduled it for the morning.
Okay.
That's a really good point, Liza Jane, and any kind of facilitation structure that has equity and participation, right? Everybody's showing up. Let's create a safe way that people can express themselves, and then note cards or whatever the method is get collected and then read anonymously, right? But everyone has kind of that obligation to participate rather than just an opening of conversation, and we may not hear from those that are a little bit more withdrawn.
We might want to think about too, just start time a little bit more if it's in morning. We have some extreme morning people amongst us, and we have some people who are not such great morning people. And so if we could find a nice little blend to give enough time to, sugar up, caffeine up, and be ready to go. And I fall in the latter, by the way, to just add maybe a little more time for buffer for waking up is always a good thing.
I was thinking the same thing, Lisa, like maybe a stronger pot of coffee that morning.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what logistics we've worked on for the board meeting yet, but there is an amazing place in Joseph that makes the most amazing donuts. And I know last time, many years ago, when we were there for our board meeting, we got a fresh hot order each morning. And they were just wonderful. So I'll tag Eric and April to figure out that, make sure we have extra sugar one morning.
I mean, you had me a donut, so that sounds great. Okay, does anyone have any other thoughts on this? I have a question for, it's sort of separate but related, for the staff and Shivangi, and that is just how the Oweb tribal engagement, the survey that happened with all the tribes and the plan for that, how that is dovetailing with your product, Shivangi, that Eco Northwest is producing, because they're separate but related, right? So could you just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, definitely. I know that the DEI staff committee is working through the recommendations from that report and trying to identify what they want to prioritize. We definitely do not want to recreate all of the work that went into that report, and we do not want to trouble the tribes with the same questions again and again. And so we are really in our report heavily referencing that report and its recommendations, especially common themes that the tribes, like common barriers that the tribes face along with other groups that we've spoken to. And so we will definitely be pulling recommendations and other issues that came up in that report in our deliverable in August.
And Kelly, just to follow up, the last staff idea team, DEI team meeting, we spent a big chunk of it starting to go through those recommendations and talking about essentially easy, medium, hard lifts for the agency. We didn't get all the way through that. And in our next couple of meetings, we're going to finish that conversation. And then our plan is to bring the results of that conversation to this committee.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay, so we have gotten through our agenda.
Bruce has his hand up, Kelly.
Wait, oh, sorry, Bruce, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I can't see your hand. Please go.
That's okay. Just out of curiosity, Courtney, who is the DEI staff committee?
So Eric, help me if I miss anybody. Jesse, Eric, myself, Christy, who's on the meeting today, helping out in place of April.
I've got it up here, Courtney.
Good.
If it
Thanks,
helps.
Eric.
So we've got Ken Fetcho, Rachel Thompson, Kobe Menton, Max Chabra, Ivy, Clark Henry. A big staff committee.
And it's been super exciting. Some of our new staff that have recently joined the agency, including Jesse, have asked to be part of the committee. So it's kind of really grown in the last few months with a lot of new energy. And one of the things I would just point out is when we initially formed the committee, we did make the decision that the tribal liaison would be a permanent member of the committee. We thought that was a really important part of the conversation. And then otherwise, we've had staff transition off and on in order to provide additional opportunities for different staff to engage and participate in the learning without making the committee kind of too big to manage.
Eric, or Courtney, I may already have it, but if you wouldn't mind sharing that list once again with the committee, the group here, either email or chat. Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we email it around just so you guys will know what their positions are and where they sit within the agency, so you can kind of see how we are trying to pull members from every section. Because one of the ways we run all of our cross-section teams is that then we ask those members to go back to their individual section meetings and report on what we're working on and get feedback from their coworkers to bring to the committee.
Sounds great. Kelly, are we at a point to start wrapping up, you think?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at my list of action items that I've been taking notes on. And I just want to make sure that I've got this right with what the staff's been tracking. So I think the first action item was the discussion on committee member engagement in the outreach meetings. And I think we decided that staff can invite committee members as needed if they think that it's going to be beneficial to the conversation. So just keep that in mind when you're having meetings with folks. And if you if you're so inclined, sharing a meeting schedule with this committee as well, so we can get things calendared and that time secured. Staff is also going to send the committee members a report, and I was a little bit confused with this one. Is this the report from the governor's office, or I need a little help here? All I have is report, and we talked about a number of reports.
It's the new, and I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's statewide DEI initiatives. And we'll get the link out to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And then the last kind of action item is just for Oweb staff to share the list of Oweb DEI committee staff with the board committee. And then tied to that, the staff DEI committee will be invited to attend the board DEI committee meetings moving forward. Did I miss anything? Lisa?
Yeah, thanks. And we're going to look at what we have and can easily grab from OGMAS in terms of granting history. Just to provide some background. I won't ask for a bunch of extra work, Bruce, but if we've got something that's pretty readily available, we'll get that for you.
Lisa, do we want to wait and just see the results of Shivangi and Jade's work, or do we want to go ahead and do that? Because they've been doing that a little bit.
Let me see what we have, because I have some curiosity about it as well now. And
Okay.
There may be something deeper that I'm interested in that may help this committee. So just I'll work with Steph and Cyrus and just do a little poking at it to see what's out there.
Kelly, just as a side note there, it's not really an action item, sort of, but that we agreed to meet more often in the fall and winter to support the products and work.
And to invite and include the full breadth of the Oweb Staff DEI Committee in future Oweb DEI Committee meetings. Too much overlap here to be more inclusive.
And we promise we won't schedule meetings just for meetings' sake. If there are, or maybe put meetings on the calendar and cancel them if not necessary. So we will use your time wisely.
Great. Thank you, Liza Jane. Okay, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. When you wave around, it really helps me.
Well, thank you, Dan and Kelly, for today's meeting. I just had one suggestion or an idea for Lisa and Stephanie on your outreach projects. I think we might be well served to make a connection with the Oregon Ecumenical Ministries, particularly their environmental side of it. They are a long-term organization that goes across rural, urban issues. They have a strong environmental presence, and we're working on DEI issues long before there were DEI issues that everybody talked about. So I don't know the current staff. I knew David Leslie when he was executive director, but I know they've been around for a long time and have a lot of institutional organizational memory in Oregon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
Outstanding staff work, everyone. Great conversation. Thank you. It's inspiring.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Great to see everyone.
Bye, have a great day.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.